Whatever.
Hey folks, we are back with Bryn Musselwhite this time. Journalist extraordinaire, videographer extraordinaire, and general all-round retro car person. Been looking forward to chatting to Bryn for a while. So welcome, Bryn.
Hello, David.
Hello.
I'll take that. Extraordinaire journalist and things that unfortunately, I'm not actually a journalist anymore.
Well,
technically.
once upon a time.
Once upon a time, and I worked out very recently because I can't remember why I did it now, but I've written, I estimate, over 1.5 million words about feature cars and road trips and stuff like that, which I thought it was going to be maybe a couple of 100,000, but legitimately I have the invoices for the magazine articles to prove it, and the average word counts and all that sort of stuff. So that really did surprise me.
Enough words to get to the moon.
Yes, and back a couple of times probably. Is it 220? I don't know how many thousand miles it is to the moon. That's bad. That's a hole in my knowledge.
You don't need to go there, so I wouldn't worry too much about it.
This is not important to my cause. Exactly.
There's no atmosphere. I actually have a list of questions for you, which is shockingly well organised of me.
No, I'm impressed, and we could always have the same conversation that we've had for. I've known you for about 15 years.
Thereabouts.
But I think let's hit up some questions then.
Okay.
Go where you want.
I'm going to start you with my starting question for interviews, which is why cars?
Why cars? It is the same old story for most of us. It's a family member. My father was a fireman by trade, and later on in his life, when he became quite good at being a fireman, he became a civil servant. And throughout his life, he raced old pre-war cars, predominantly MGs. And then when I came along, my first abiding memory of my father was sitting in his race car, aged about 4, and him pushing it off a trailer. And in my head, I'm steering it and all that sort of stuff. But in reality, I was pretty sat there dribbling on myself. And then, just constantly being surrounded by that sort of thing. Because he worked so many hours, the time invariably I spent with him was either we were very, very blessed. We used to have a month's holiday each summer where we'd go abroad. And outside of that, it was generally going to Silverstone, going to Liddon Hill, going to all these other places. He used to either go circuit racing, sprinting, hill climbing, whatever, because my mum was kind of over it by that stage. So me and him would get in an old Volvo estate or an old Vauxhall Carlton estate and drag some old race car around the country, and then he'd go off and race. And looking back now, I was about probably 11 or 12, and I'd just be roaming the hills around Wiscombe, or like I say, Liddon Hill, or even Brands Hatch and places like that, and hanging out with all these other sort of kids who were the orphans of racing parents. So that's the car thing, really. I think it was just indelibly imprinted into my, the way I was nurtured as a child.
Well, raised on cars. This is a good story.
Yeah, and disproportionately so. It was, my father was, he worked very hard, but it's hard to say really. He had a lot of cars. I mean, when he died, we were kind of waiting for the phone calls to say, is he going to come and pick up this race car, or this, this other car that he's having built somewhere, or this chassis, or this engine that's been rebuilt. And we never got the phone calls because I'm fairly sure there was a few rebuilders or friends of his that were like, no one's ever going to know it existed. What are we going to do? So that was that one.
Bits and pieces disappearing off. As they occasionally do, I guess. So what was your first car? What was the first car you had? Did you inherit anything from your dad, or did you buy it?
No. He was very locked down on, and I don't know whether it was, basically I was taught to work for everything. So if I wanted something, I had to work for it. There was no handouts until I was 17 and my first car. So just flipping back slightly, I had a Honda C50 Cub moped when I was about 15, 16. And again, he turned around and said, right, go buy it yourself. That's the way this is going to work. So I found one in the local paper for 30 quid, and it was about 4 miles away at this little village. So went and had a look at it. It had rusty front forks. It literally came out of the back porchway of an old farmyard. And I gave them the money that I saved from my Saturday job. And the following weekend, my dad disappears off with our dog, who was this comedy-sized Irish wolfhound crossed with a giant schnauzer.
Oh my God.
And they go for it. I mean, it was ridiculous. We had a big old farmyard table and he could literally just walk up and put his head on it, sort of thing. So anyway, off he goes for a walk, comes back about 2.5 hours later. No crash helmet, no MOT, no insurance, no tax. Danny, the Irish wolfhound, traipsing along behind him, and he's just ridden this C50 back across the hills, back to the village that we lived in. Not really. So I mean, looking at it now, he was a chief fire officer of a county, and he kind of knew the legalities of that sort of stuff. But he was like, well, that's how we're going to get it home. And yet, if I wanted to go and do something or drive one of his cars or something like that, it was never allowed. So it was very much I had to do it for myself. So he said to me, don't buy a motorbike for the road when you're 16, because all my mates had DT50s and all that sort of stuff. We lived about 7 miles outside Taunton, up on the Quantock Hills, on the edge of the Quantocks. And to get anywhere, I had to cycle. So my nearest friend lived 3.5, 4 miles away. And I really wanted a motorbike. And he said, look, don't buy a motorbike and I'll get you a car. So I passed my test in a couple of months, and I had a Saturday job on a campsite hotel. He goes off to look at this car, and I was getting Auto Trader. I'm looking at it, I'm going, is it going to be a Chevette? Is it going to be a Metro? I had this whole list of cars. I mean, basically, he could have turned up with anything, and I would have loved it. Right, that was always going to be a given because it was going to be mine.
Yeah.
And he turned up at work on a Saturday lunchtime. And he said, right then, son, we've found your car. And my mum was there as well. And they were both looking pretty pleased with themselves. And I genuinely had no idea what they were going to buy me. I had no real choice in this process. So I stood there. I was like, right, what have we got? My dad said, well, we bought you a 2CV. And I was like, right, 2CV. 2CV. And I knew that he'd had a couple of 2CVs in the early 60s in London, because he had a French girlfriend called Salome, and he'd called the 2CV Salome, and it was a little 425cc AK, I think, was the engine code on it. And so I knew they were lurking in the history. And my mum had one when I was very young, and she'd crashed it into a cow. So 2CVs had always kind of been lurking in the background. And yeah, sure enough, bought this 2CV, and it was 7 years old at the time. It was bright orange. And it was delivered on, I think it was a Tuesday night after he told me on the Saturday lunchtime. And it was amazing, because looking back now, he knew exactly what he was doing with the car and everything, because all my friends had Mark 1 Escorts, Mark 2 Escorts, Chevettes, all that kind of stuff. I had this 2CV, and I can remember just thinking, oh, God, it's so uncool, it's so slow. Actually, I didn't even really think it was uncool. I just thought it's a bit slow. It's a bit slow, Mm. And at college, about 3 weeks after I got it, it was a bit of a sunny day. It was, one of those early spring summer days. And I put the roof back, and we were going off somewhere as a bunch of mates up on the hills. And my mate had a Mini with blacked out windows, and a couple of girls wanted to come with us, or we had a couple of girls with some of that. And they all came and got in the 2CV, and he ended up driving on his own with another one of my mates. And I can remember driving along, just going, there it is.
That's why you have a 2CV.
Genius. Yeah. So yeah, it was really cool, and that then started off a chain of 2CVs and Morris Minors, which saw me through my late teens and early 20s.
I would not have had you down as a 2CV man, but there we are. That's
There is still one about a quarter of a mile from where I'm sat now, which I have partially owned for 10 or 12 years, with a galvanised chassis. Ooh. That one day needs to be revived. And I keep on looking at the video of, God, and his name escapes me, the guy with the BMW flat twin engined. Oh,
De Beers, God. Alex De Beers.
No, that's the green and white one that was at the gathering, wasn't it?
Oh, not that guy.
No, this... he's a very famous, he's a very talented, well-known 2CV racer. And it's him shaking down this BMW flat twin engine 2CV at Mallory Park maybe 7 or 8 years ago. And it just keeps resonating with me, because 2CVs were one of those things that I never quite finished scratching. So I always think you need to have some sort of closure with a vehicle, style or genre, that you achieve a certain point. You're like, yep, cool, I can move on now.
Yep.
Yeah. Not that it would be the best in the world or anything like that, but that you feel you're satisfied with the point. And the 2CVs, I had 6 or 7 of them. I bought a Mahler big bore kit for one. I drove it was Garrett built 3 T1 turbos in about 1990, I guess, 91, 92, something like that. And one of them, Garrett kept one. Another one got fitted to something random, and a guy in Weston-super-Mare fitted one to a 2CV. And there was an article on it in Car Magazine or Auto Car. It was one of my dad's mags because I didn't really read those sort of newer style performance magazines. And I can remember tracking the guy down, driving up there in my 2CV, and saying to him, I love this. I want it, and it needs to work. Has this all those things that you do when you're young and exuberant. And he let me drive it, and it was amazing. And then about maybe 6 or 8 months later, he phoned me up and said it was for sale for about £3,000, which was about £2,950 more than I could earn in about a month.
Yeah.
So never got it. But I don't know what happened to that car, and it probably got broke. But again, that was one of those ones where goes, I know how good a 2CV on the right day is immense. It's everything you need from a car, and it was pretty much only my ego that took me away from 2CVs into other cars.
That's interesting. So yeah, I've never ever been in a 2CV, so I should probably give it a try.
What?
But the one thing I do know about them is you can drop them onto the floor very, very easily. So that's always in their favour. I think they're a great, perfect sort of first retro type thing, as they would be now. I mean, obviously, back when you were learning to drive, you could buy one that was only 7 years old. But I think as a car, you can mechanically understand, but can also have fun with, and is already kind of interesting in this day and age. I think they're probably a good first foray into this ridiculousness. So you started off well, clearly.
The only thing I would put down against them would be the crash safety.
Yes, a little bit.
And I always reconciled that it was better than a motorbike or a push bike. And I used to do a lot of stupid stuff, so I didn't really think about that sort of thing now, but I know getting in one now, I'm a bit like, I'm more aware of my own mortality. I've also got more to lose materialistically. I'm a father, stuff like that. So all these things come into play. But yeah, the 2CV, the first one I lowered was my first ever one, because we went to go and watch truck racing at Brands Hatch. And the support race for the truck race was the 2CVs.
Yes, yeah.
And I can remember the commentator very clearly, and I remember referencing this again years later when I ended up in the commentary box at Brands Hatch, and I could see the view that he'd seen as he was saying it. There was these 4 2CVs going down the start-finish straight, and they went into that right end. Given that I've commentated at Brands Hatch, I don't know,
Paddock.
15 times. Paddock, there we go. Coming to Paddock Bend, there was 3 or 4 abreast, and they ducked over the crest, and you very slightly lose sight of the outside line, and then they reappeared again, and they were still 4 abreast. And he said, I have literally never seen that. That has not ever happened. So and that really stuck with me. And I remember walking into the pits and looking at these 2CV race cars. I was there in my 2CV. I'd only had it a couple of months. And saying to the guys, like, how'd you get them that low? How'd you get them that low? And this racer, whoever he was amazing. He just literally jacked up the side of the car and he went, right, you need a 9mm spanner on that. If you want to get fancy, 17mm spanner to take the shock absorber off, wind out the tie rods, and Bob's your uncle. And he then explained that if you wanted to upright the kingpins, you just cut the trailing arms and rotated them on the front so that you didn't have massive amounts of caster. I think it's caster, where the wheels lean over. But he said, basically you can lower them for free. So that was it. I drove back to Somerset. I used £11 worth of petrol in my 2CV, which was horrendous at the time. I was like, oh my God, I've just consumed half of the OPEC reserves. And then, promptly went into the garage. I think a couple of weeks later I went into the garage, because I always remember it again. Parents were away. They used to travel a lot. And I'm there. I think I got drunk and watched American Graffiti.
Good choice.
And then went out to the garage, and it was, so that would have been that would have been midsummer, because I can remember it got light really early in the morning, and I absolutely put this 2CV on the ground and went out and did maybe 15, 20 miles in it. And I can remember just driving round and round and roundabout, laughing my arse off at how well it handled. I was just, 4 o'clock in the morning, and the sun's just come up, and there's me in this 2CV, howling like a banshee with the roof down. It was, very cool.
That's awesome. Absolutely awesome. So, from those adventures, you ended up being a journalist. So, how did that transition occur? What did you do, and why?
That happened because I'd naturally, as you do, you rebel against your parents. So I guess some people do, some people don't, but that's what I did. My father read Motorsport magazine, Classic Car magazine, and Safety Fast, the MG specific magazines and the old stuff. So when I was a kid, I read a comic called the Buster comic. And when I was about 10 years old, he turned around to me and he said, "Look, son, I think you're getting a bit old for comics. I think, if you want to get a magazine each month, I'll get you one on subscription, and then you can have a magazine." I was like, okay, cool. So I think we went into WH Smith's on a Saturday, and I was just faced with this wall of print, and I picked up a Street Machine magazine, and it would have been when Street Machine was maybe 6-7 years old, something like that, mid-80s, and I can't remember what the magazine was on the cover or anything like that, but it just resonated with me, and that was it. I asked for a subscription to Street Machine magazine, so the newsagent used to deliver it once a month, and that was it. So I read that, and those guys, the Nigel Grimshaw driving across America in a Pontiac GTO in the early 90s. So I left school and I'd had the 2CVs and all that sort of stuff. Moving on through the 90s, art college, whole bunch of random jobs, never really settling anywhere. And the whole time I've read Street Machine magazine, and car culture's always there, and I'm obviously becoming more and more aware of the world. And about a couple of years out of college, me and two friends wanted to go and travel around the world, as lots of people do. So we saved up a couple of grand each and started planning this route out. And then one of my friends dropped out, and he's still a very, very good friend to this day, and has a gorgeous backdated 964. But yeah, basically he got a job with a really good job, and was like, right, guys, I can't come. So me and my other friend Paul just went, well, what are we going to do? Where are we going to go with a couple of grand each? So we decided to go to America and basically just go to New York, get a car, drive to California, drive back to New York. And this was 1996. That was our game plan. That's literally as technical as it got. And I can remember it was early July, and we're lying on the floor in his mum and dad's living room, and it was one of those really super hot days, and the clouds, the wind is very, very slightly ruffling these full-length curtains, and we were sat there, and it was just kind of like, we were looking at teletext or something, or Oracle or whatever it was you used to have on the TV, where you try and find the cheap flights.
Yep.
And we booked the flights to New York on a brand new credit card I just got. Because my dad has said to me, look, book it on a credit card because it's more secure than booking it like by paying. And I don't even maybe I had a debit card, I don't know. Anyway, did that, and then was like, oh, this is exactly what they'd love in Street Machine magazine. So I wrote a letter to the address in the front of the magazine, and it was when Matt Howell was the editor. So I addressed it to Matt, and I didn't hear anything, and that was cool, no worries. So we went to America, and I kept a diary, and I took a load of photos, got back, and I wrote the letter again. And this time it came back from Rich Nichols. And it turns out in the time that we'd planned this trip and gone on it, like we booked the tickets early July, we left a couple of weeks later, and we came back late September. It had transferred editorial direction from EMAP in Peterborough, and Matt had left as editor, and it had moved to Clive Howson Publishing, CH Publications, down in southwest London. And Rich Nichols, who had worked on Custom Car, was now the editor. And Rich just basically wrote back to me and went, yeah, cool, looks good. Write it up in this format, send me these pictures, and drop it in when or post it across when you can. So I did that. And I remember, I was living in Somerset, and I had this Hillman Avenger, and I thought, if I stick this in the post on a floppy disk and as a printout, like I I can't do that. I've got an opportunity here to go to the Street Machine offices. And this doesn't sound like much now, but when you've read a magazine for 15 years throughout your formative years, and those 15 years constitute, what would it be, like 70% of my life, and you can't remember the first 5 years of your life, so it's virtually all my life I've read this magazine. I've read Clive Howsam writing about his Beetle and his Carmen gear and all this sort of stuff, and Rich Nichols in Custom Car, and this guy's like, he's cool for me to come to the office? What? So I said to Rich, I'm passing by Walton on the Hill. Can I drop the article in? And he went, yeah, of course, you're passing by. Brilliant. And I was like, yeah, I'm passing by. I basically got in my Hillman Avenger. Yeah, got in my Hillman Avenger with my Hillman Avenger, which cost me 195 quid. And I had my floppy disk, my printout, and I drove to Walton on the Hill. I got there for lunchtime, went into the office, which was at the back of a kitchen showroom. It's a very small office. I can still smell it because it was very paper heavy and paper centric. And had a good chat to Rich, absolutely stand-up guy, so much love for Rich Nichols. And he went, Clive's over in the pub. It's lunchtime. Do you want to come over? I was like, I actually get to meet Clive Howsam. So, and I don't think I've ever even told Clive this, and I haven't spoken to Clive in years, but we went over to the pub. Clive's having his glass of red wine at the end of the bar. And yeah, I was just talking to this guy that had basically edited the magazine of my formative years. So it was an incredible experience. And that then led to my article being published in May. God, when was it? I don't think when it was. Maybe May '97, something like that. It came out, and they liked the way I wrote. So Rich phoned me up and said, "Look, do you want to write an article a month for us? Telephone interviews. We'll send you a spec sheet." So Mike Key, who was a popular photographer for the magazine at the time, would go off and shoot a car, and whilst he was shooting it, the person who'd built the car would fill out a text sheet with their name and address, run down what the car was, bit of history, and then that would give me something to phone them up and basically sit on the phone like we are now, talk cars for an hour. I'd type up all the notes, write an article, send it in. That was the format. So I did that once a month, and yeah, I did that for about 18 months, freelance, like once a month, once every couple of months, I get an article published.
That's fantastic. Did you end up working for them full time, or was it just always freelance with Street Machine?
I was only ever freelance, and this is where I sort of learnt a very good life lesson, I think, of taking the positive out of all the negatives. Basically, for those 18 months I was freelancing, I just dotted around the country. I lived in Chester. I had hepatitis A, ended up in isolation in a hospital in North Wales, and
good Lord.
all sorts of things randomly happened to me. Ended up in London, and my father fell ill, and he was in his mid to late 50s at the time, and this would have been early 98. I was working for a computer firm in West London doing maintenance contracts.
Good Lord.
Which was one of those temping jobs which had just kind of turned into, we'll pay you £14,000 a year and come into this office and it'll be amazing. And I just got sucked into it because I was living in London and I was getting drunk with my friends and we were going out and I needed some money to be able to do that. And he fell ill, living in Somerset. He just retired, not through ill health reasons, but just because he'd been very successful and was in a position where he could. And yeah, he was diagnosed with a brain tumour at the end of February. And at the end of start of May, he died on May the 1st. So very quick decline. At first, we thought it was depression linked because there was mental, it sort of manifested as being mental issues. It was a very, very hard time, as you can,
I can imagine. Yeah.
Anybody that's lost anyone, right? It's a personal journey. But for me, there was two real key moments which really lead me to sitting here talking to you now. And one was I told him he was going to die. So the doctors wouldn't tell him that he had this inoperable brain tumour and all this stuff. And he was kind of coming out with this garbled messaging. So he'd refer to the nurses by my mum's name. And you could tell there was something going on behind the screen, basically.
Yeah.
So my mum and my sister and I, we said, well, look, we've got to tell him. And I was going to be the one that was going to do it. So at the age of 24, I think 24, 25, I told my dad he was going to die. And it was the last piece of clarity he ever had. But he held onto my hand, looked me in the eye, and just went, "It's one of those things."
Bloody hell.
At that point, and at that point, I just went, "You know what? It bloody is, because we're all gonna die. So unless you get on with it and you do it now, you're gonna look back and go, shit, I wish I'd done that." So I left there. He then died a couple of weeks later. I wasn't there at his death. Weirdly, I was auditioning for children's TV presenter.
Yes. I was going to come on to that at some point.
So this is how it all stacks up, right? And it's something I didn't tell anyone I was a children's TV presenter, and I was only a children's TV presenter for a very short amount of time for very good reason. But essentially, a mate of mine was a producer for Granada TV, a mate from Somerset. We were all drunk in the pub when I was back in Somerset at the weekend visiting my dad whilst he was ill, and he turned around to me and said, "They're looking for children's TV presenters on CITV. I reckon you'd be up for it. I reckon you'd be good at it." I was like, "Yeah, whatever, mate. Don't be so stupid." And he went, No, seriously, put an audition tape." He said, "I can't do anything. It's nothing to do with me, but I reckon you'd be good at it." So we went out and recorded this stupid tape where we're surfing the Severn Bore and we're falling over things and all this stuff on VHS. Sent it off. I get an audition. I get through. I get down to the last 6. Basically, Stephen Mulhern, the guy off Britain's Got Talent and all this stuff, he got the job of the male presenter, and I did holiday cover for him. So, because I was the next in line, and essentially that's where I was on the day my dad died. But that then gave me this glimpse, because I didn't get the presenting job and the holiday cover didn't come till much later on. But I got this, it was the day of his funeral, and I got this phone call middle of the day, and we'd had the family service in the morning and we were having a memorial service in the afternoon. And, this phone call, "Hey, Bryn, you didn't get the job, blah, blah, blah. We're really interested. We want to work with you in the future, blah, blah." I was like, "Okay, cool." And I'm this maintenance contract manager for a firm in West London. And I just had this moment of clarity and just went, what the utter shit are you doing, you idiot? So I went back to London. I turned around and told all my mates, "I'm quitting London. I don't know what I'm going to do, but, this has to change." And I think about 2-3 days later, I had to deliver and this does loop back to being a journalist, trust me, I had to deliver my monthly article to Street Machine magazine. So, as was always the way, if I had a car and I had an opportunity to drive, that's what I did. So I drove down to Walton on Thames, or was it Walton on Hill? It was Walton on the Hill where the office was, and Walton on Thames where Rich lived, at about 11 o'clock at night. And as I went to go and put the envelope through the door, I could see the light was on in the office. So I knocked on the door, and Rich came out to the door, and he was like, "You all right? What are you doing?" I said, "Oh, I'm just dropping off my article." And he went, "Oh, right." I said, "What are you doing?" He went, "Oh, it's deadline. This is what you do when you're on deadline in a magazine." Went inside, had a cup of tea, left at 12:30 at night or whatever. And I said, "You really need someone to help you." And he went, "Yeah, I do." He said, "But we can't afford anyone." I went, "Well, how much can you afford?" And he went, "Well, £500 a month for a couple of days a week." So I took that. I went back to my job, and I turned around to my boss, and I don't even remember his name, but he was an Indian guy who'd been back to India the year before because his father had passed away, and he'd taken a month off work and had been with his family. And as soon as I said to him what had happened, he turned around and said, "Take a month off." And I'd only been there 2 months. And he said, "Just take a month off, come back in a month, see what you say." So I went back to Somerset, obviously spent time with my mum in the family house. Just, there's a lot of stuff to process. And I built my beach buggy. I finished my beach buggy in that month with the help of a guy called Steve Dyer. And Steve Dyer was the guy that built the slammed Land Rover, the Series 1. Mix smash sort of thing in his garage, and he was building that whilst we were finishing off the beach buggy alongside it. And at the end of that month, it was run to the sun. Got the beach buggy finished, drove it to Exeter, drove it down to Newquay, got as far as Exeter, and my buddy who was riding with me was the guy that I drove across America with, a guy called Paul Quartley, who was like one of my oldest, dearest friends. And he taught me so much as well, just about life, because we basically get to Exeter services and the clutch is gone. So, and I'm like, I can't believe it. I've just spent all month building this car. I say building this car, I've thrown some tube at it, I've splashed some paint on it, and I haven't probably even bothered changing the spark plugs in the 25-year-old Type 1 motor. So he turns around to me and said, "Are you familiar with the process behind spread betting?" And I was like, "Not really," and I'm still not to this day. But essentially then we had a 10p bet for every gear change that I reckon I could pull out of the bag before the clutch finally went, and we had to drive back to Taunton. Did Run to the Sun, took some pictures, wrote about it for Street Machine, and then that started me off. Fixed the beach buggy up, and then used to commute to Walton on the Hill once a week. I'd leave on a Tuesday morning about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning in the beach buggy, drive to southwest London, sleep on either the floor of the office or mates' floors or something like that, and then drive back a couple of days later, having done the news section, the letters section, or whatever was needed. Write an article for those 2 days, and for that I got £500 a month, and that was just about enough money to keep me ticking over.
That's fantastic. So just sort of, again, persistence and just trying to find your opportunity, I guess. So
it was never a conscious decision, and I think that's what apart from that moment where I just went, when I was literally like, why am I working in London? Like, who made the decision that I should be working for a computer firm in West London? Like, hang on a minute, where was I when that happened?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I was drunk and I was, and I was chasing somebody, So yeah, that was really. But after that, everything was gut. Everything I've done that's led me to this point today has been a gut decision. Some of them have been formed in seconds, and I've sold houses and left countries.
Yep,
so,
I know.
Yeah. So that's that's how the journalism kicked off, through being a freelance journalist, because I was still freelance for Street Machine. And interestingly enough, right, this is where I should have learnt the lesson about journalism. Was I can remember at the end of each month, Rich used to go through the magazine and he'd put a post-it note on each page for the freelancers as to how much they were going to get paid, and that would then go to the accounts department next door, in the office next door, basically, and they'd make the payments. And I can remember digging out the copy of the magazine that my first article had been in, and stuck on the page was £500, which at the time obviously was a huge amount of money to me. And he'd crossed it out and written 350.
Ooh.
And because he had no money, right? So
yeah.
He'd been working on car magazines, I think, since the late 80s. It's now the late 90s. He's seen the market drop. He's seen the budgets drop. He's seen the readerships drop. And because people think, the 90s were the heyday, they were and they weren't for maybe Max Power and stuff like that. But then Max Power was very much a shooting star. It existed for 10 years. Obviously, it lasted longer, but in its heyday. So he had an opportunity, and he knew that £350 to me was going to blow my tiny mind, and I'd be more than happy if he gave me 35 quid. And if he could shave 150 quid to relocate it somewhere else and spend it on some content, then all credit to him, and I don't hold it against him at all. But at that point, I should have gone, oh, that's very telling.
This is how the industry works. Okay.
Yeah. So, but through working for Street Machine, I then started going out on features, and one of the first people I met was John Hill, who was I don't think he really does. He still does stuff for Classic Ford and a couple of other mags, but John was just hilarious. He was about 10 years old. He is 10 years older than me, and he was just the perfect person to introduce me to the industry, because he was a cabinet maker and a cabinet restorer, and he'd been into modified Morris Minors, and had got into Street Machine by being part of the Morris Minor Owners Club and knowing Russ Smith and Matt Howell and all those guys. And he'd kind of just come with the magazine and continued as a freelancer, and he's just very happy-go-lucky and a really good guy, and we had the best of times. And I basically looked at him and went, yeah, this is cool. This is what I want to do. Turn up places, blag your way into old factories, get paid to write about cars, take photos of them. Sounds amazing.
It worked out well.
Yeah, did all right, huh?
Yeah. So you're part of the origin story of Retro Cars magazine, which is probably its own own podcast, to be fair. But so I'm guessing like Street Machine. Well, I say died. It kind of turned into American Car World. So at that point, were you then looking around at other opportunities, or how did it come about that you got involved with this ANS publishing? I'm guessing it's via Simon Woolley, who we should probably get on here.
It was no. So it was actually John Hill.
Oh, okay.
So John was a freelancer for Classic Ford magazine, and I think I did my first job for Classic Ford in 2000. I think it was. And yeah, let me get this right. So I freelanced for. I mean, John really was pivotal in introducing me to so many. He was so generous with his spirit and his energy, and just that he just, you know, it didn't matter if someone needed a writer, because that's predominantly what I did then, because I couldn't afford the camera kit, even though I had an old film camera. And also back then, I was getting paid great money for writing. I was getting 18 pence a word. You'd get, you know, 250 quid for writing an article, and if I was on it, I could go out during the day, see the car, go home that night, and sit up till 3-4 o'clock in the morning and write the article. So I could earn 250 quid. I could earn 500-600 quid a week, and this was the late 90s. And I literally had rent, beer, and fun money, and you know, to spend the money on. So he introduced me to Revs magazine, and in mid 1999, I went to Revs to talk to them about some freelance work, and I sat down with a guy called Simon Hargreaves, who was the ex-editor of Performance Bikes magazine at EMAP, and Revs was part of EMAP. It's like little brother to Max Power magazine. And he said, look, we're going through a redesign. There's a lot going on. I need a features editor. Would you? I'm interviewing you for a job right now instead of freelance work. And I was like, okay, right, okay. So anyway, I got the job. It turns out it was actually for a features writer. It was $13,500 a year, which was incidentally what I'd left London on.
Yeah.
2 years before, and I moved to Peterborough, and had 9 months of absolute hilarity and horrible pain at the same time. I didn't like where I lived. I didn't like where I worked. But the core of the work, which was basically us pissing around in old cars and getting paid to do it, was all that mattered. I made just enough money to support myself and to eat a bit of food. I think at one point in my fridge, in my rented flat, which literally had a bed, a surfboard on 2 suitcases, because a girl came round once and was literally like, are you some sort of weirdo? And I didn't have a cooker, but I had a fridge, because the flat came with a fridge, and it had a can of like nitrous oxide booster fuel or something in it. I had a tie and a block of out-of-date cheese. And I think it must have been one of those moments, bearing in mind I was a 25-year-old man, 26-year-old man. You know, she looked at me and was just kind of like, you're a child. You're an utter child. I think she was genuinely worried that I wouldn't wet the bed or something. So, yeah, Revs was great. But essentially, the magazine was redesigned. When I first started, it had a new sort of clearer, more technical direction, and not so sort of. It was maybe a bit more in line with Max Power. Anyway, 9 months later, the sales figures had tanked, and we got an email from the publishers essentially saying, "What have you done? You've ruined the magazine," all this stuff. We were all called into this meeting, and I just signed a lease on a house that morning. So Simon Hargreaves, who was still the editor, turned around and said, "We've got to have a meeting this afternoon, lads. We've got to make some changes on the magazine." I was like, "Look, I'm going to go and sign the lease on a house. Is this anything I should know about?" And he went, No, you're fine, don't worry." Came back in the afternoon, got told that basically the publishers had turned on us. And I was like, what? The publishers that told us we'd done a really good job on the redesign and how amazing it was and how they were so happy to have this magazine in their stable and all that stuff. And he went, yeah. And I went, okay, cool. I went outside, went back up to the office, wrote a resignation letter in crayon, went downstairs.
That's infinitely childish. Perfect.
Yeah. I think it was literally what I had closest to hand on my desk. Wasn't allowed any sharp objects, but Si was outside, and at the time we both smoked. And we're both having a cigarette. And I just handed him this resignation letter, and he went, "I'm not accepting that. Don't be so stupid. It'll all be all right." And I was like, "No, seriously, I'm out of here. Like, I can't work in this anymore." And he said, "What are you going to do?" And I went, "I don't know." And he went, "Brilliant." So I I had this lease in this house in Peterborough, this shared house, because I'd been banned from driving for speeding, and I'd had to move into Peterborough, and got my license back, and I was sort of tied into it. But yeah, I went freelance again, and that's when I did my first job for Classic Ford, and that's when I found out the editor was this guy called Simon Woolley, and Simon Woolley, for those that don't know him, has been he's probably, I genuinely off the top of my head cannot think of a magazine editor that I respect more, and that goes for people I know, people I don't know, and titles all over the world. There's a couple of guys who do really, really good titles who are equally as dedicated, but Simon has managed to, his longevity in 20 years of being an editor and his constant way of evolving content, making it feel fresh, having ideas, and just being able to hold a community together has always inspired me. So that's who he is. And he's still the editor of Classic Ford magazine now, having gone off and done other things like retro cars, which I will get back to, I promise.
Anytime.
But he also, he was in the year above me at Graphic Design College in Taunton in Somerset. So we had a lot of mutual friends, and he was genuinely like, hang on, Bryn Musselwhite, didn't you go to SCAT? And I was like, Simon Woolley, didn't you go to SCAT? So then we sort of, you know, the friendship, which was never really there at college, I would be lying if I knew him very well at college, was then kind of like, Si, right, okay. So then he then had this idea, and I think it was pretty much his idea, to do Retro Cars magazine, which again was like a practical classics, but for cool stuff that had that undefinable element of want in it. And he came to me and said, do you want to write the A to Z of retro and sort of, you know, be there from the start? So clearly I was all pumped up and excited, because it was old chod that lots of us wanted and lots of us could actually afford. So I was well into that, because I had absolutely no aspirations to move any further up the automotive ladder as perceived by other people. So, and there I was.
Well, what's interesting about that is, and I'll probably come on to the evolution to where you get to this point, is that you're now filming Bugattis and such like. But you started out at a place where, like, probably the pinnacle of automotive excellence was Beardmore's Minor or something like that. So it's interesting that sort of journey you've gone on there. I just want to touch on something somewhere along the line between sort of retro cars and now. You became a photographer, and your photography is good. I like it. But how did that?
Well, thank you.
How did that occur? Like you've gone from sort of writer to photographer. Was that a thing born out of need? Because as budgets got squeezed, people started to have to fulfill dual roles, or did you always want to be a photographer, given that you went to graphic design school and such like?
Well, here's the thing that's always confused people, and it's kind of my curse and my blessing, in so much as I am a jack of a lot of trades, is that I've always been a photographer. So I first had a camera when I was about 9 or 10 years old. I have photo albums full of photos from Silverstone, from Linden Hill, from Brands Hatch, all these circuits that I went to with my dad. Basically, he'd go off and race, and I'd stand there with a camera. And I can remember being stood in the pits at Silverstone when I was maybe 13 or 14, and he was doing, I can't even remember what the race was now, but basically you had to go out and do 5 or 6 laps, and then you'd come in, you'd change a spark plug, and you'd go back out again. So we're all in the pit garage at Silverstone, this is like a VSCC race, vintage sports car club race, and all along either side of me are these middle-aged men and their wives, and they're the people that are changing the spark plugs. And because my dad and me are there on our own, and my dad can't really let me, even though he did let me wander around on my own, I was changing the spark plug for him, even though essentially he was just going to get out of the car and one of his mates was going to help. But I'm stood there with my camera, and I remember this steward coming up to me and sort of saying, "Sorry, son, you're not allowed in here." And then I showed him my pit pass, and he was like, "But you're not allowed a camera." And I went, "Why aren't I allowed a camera?" And he went, "Well, you've got to have a press pass, or, you know, who are you taking photos for?" And I stopped myself, "I'm taking photos for me." And he was kind of like, well, "If they're just for you, then that's okay." I'm a 13-year-old kid. Yeah. So yeah, there I am in the pit lane at Silverstone taking photos. And to me, it felt totally normal. It was like, well, I just wanted to consume more media than I had available to me.
Yeah.
So now whether I would do it now, because now you can have a phone and you can have an iPad and you can have all this media 24/7. It's there all laid out for you. Pinterest, Tumblr, forums, whatever. Whereas then, if I wanted something, I literally took a photo and I put it, in my bag, and I went and got it developed at Boots, and I got it back 3 weeks later, and it was mine, and I had it, and no one could take it away, and I could open up that book on a cold November's night in my bedroom and go, no way! Look at that race car! Look at that fire truck! Look at that bin! Look at that toilet block at Silverstone! Look at that wall! I literally took photos of everything. So moving on through, I did a bit of photography at college and product photography and stuff like that, and just always had a camera. So when I went to America and did the trip, we bought an old Cadillac in North New York State because I knew we had to buy something that was kind of interesting, right, if I was ever going to sell this as an article. And I took a load of photos. So my first ever article was a piece of photojournalism.
That's interesting.
Now, to do it professionally, I was going to need to spend a lot of money on cameras, a lot of money that I didn't have, but I could make good money from doing a little bit of TV presenting and TV work, and I could make it from writing. And as it was, the early 2000s, it was an absolute heyday, right? I'm getting great money for basically writing. So what? And writing involved a dictaphone and a laptop. So why would I go out and spend £15,000 on cameras when I can travel light and move fast? So I kept my old Canon AE1, and I still took photos. And when I did articles for Revs, I used to go off and do shows and stuff like that. The sort of stuff that, in inverted commas, a proper photographer wouldn't do, or the sort of thing that words had to sit alongside. So show reports, road trips. I did features like that for various magazines. But I knew loads of great photographers, so it just made more sense to go out and do jobs with them. And then financially, when the magazine market started dying in the mid-2000s, and I sold my house in 2006 because I was living in Somerset, I then took some of that house money because I sat in my house and I was like, I'm here for a week and I'm gone for 3 weeks. And I'd taken some really good advice through a friend of a friend who'd said, look, the market's going to crash. If you want to sell your house, sell it now. I'd made good money on it. So I then got on a plane, went to New York, went into a place called BH Photo Video. I knew exactly what I wanted. I bought a 5D Mark I, lenses, camera bag, everything I needed really, and then hit the road across America again and started taking more photos that were then in a digital format and of a quality that I could sell them to a magazine. So essentially, in answering your question, I've always been a photographer. I just haven't always been overly visible with it.
That's interesting that it come back around to be a skill you needed again and required. So that's very very nice. Now the next step is then there's intervening years because I sort of known you in between this time, and you've been doing Speed Hunters and all that kind of stuff. But suddenly you're doing video one day, and that kind of came out of nowhere for me. Like I sort of knew you in this transition period, and you disappeared off to New Zealand for a bit, which is why Retro Rise doesn't own Retro Cars magazine, people, because Bryn and I did look at doing that.
We talked to.
You
certainly went talked to Future and said, right, how much for the title? Because I wanted it, but very glad I didn't now.
In retrospect, it's probably a good idea.
Yeah, but things turned out good, but the video work was. So again, I've made videos since I was at school. There was like I said, my father was, he did all right in life. We had a video camera when I was a kid, so I used to video stuff at home. I used to make little films. I used to hang action men out of windows and pretend that they were scaling walls and make little films. And when my design course, when I left GCSE, I videoed it as a presentation. So instead of doing a portfolio, it was a video presentation. So again, loads of video clips, very early video, digital. My first digital camera I used to film on back in the early 2000s. So I've just got legions of just little 30-second clips of just being places, doing stuff. And also the TV work. So this is the real key. Sorry to loop back round. The real reason why I got into video production was because when I did the children's TV stuff, the guys in the office next to CITV produced a car program called Motor Week, and they also did Pulling Power, which was on Granada or Central or on Digital, something like that. And the guy who was in charge of all that, the series producer, a guy called Mark Boss, and he found out through the mutual friend that had actually recommended that I go for the children's TV thing, found out I was a motoring journalist, because I was a year or two into that sort of thing, right? It was like the first year that I'd been doing it freelance full time. And he went, oh, well, do you want to come and do some presenting and some production work? So I went and worked at Granada TV for on and off a year, 18 months, until I think there was a guy there, and I don't know how true this is, but I can well believe it. There's a guy called Mike Birch, who I think he's still around, and he used to do I think he did Fifth Gear for a little while and stuff like that. Maybe Johnny knew him. But basically, he saw one of the clips I'd done. He said I looked like a cowboy. Because I was, right? I didn't know what I was doing. I was driving around in brand new Citroen Saxos and Hyundai Coupes and stuff like that and basically blagging it. But that was my first experience of production. So, we used to get... I blagged a Hummer off Frank Warren, the boxing promoter, for a week. And So, I don't know... can I say this? We damaged it.
Okay.
And we got it fixed. I got it fixed overnight, and then it went back to Frank Warren, and he never knew. So, Frank, if you're listening to this and you still have your Hummer that was given to you by Don King and Mike Tyson, the damage was absolutely minimal, but there was damage, and we did have it fixed, and that happened, and it was 22 years ago, and I hope you can forgive me. And also my Rover P6, which ended up getting dumped on his driveway, leaked oil onto his drive as well in his garage where the Hummer was parked, which didn't go down too well.
It's not a man you want to upset.
Yeah, I had the chance to meet him when I dropped the Hummer back, and his driver, who was an ex-professional boxer, told me that the Rover P6, because I dropped it off and collected it from his offices in Harlow. So I picked this Hummer up, driven it back to the Midlands. We'd filmed with it for a week, and I'd driven it back down to Harlow. And my Rover P6 is still around the back of the office. And this professional boxer turns up to get in the Hummer to take it straight out because they're going out that night in it. And he went, "Oh, Frank's not very happy with you. Your car dropped oil all over his garage." And I'm literally looking under the Rover and going, "Well, I can't see any oil." And he went, No, it's been at his house all week." I was like, "What?" And he went, Yeah, we parked it where the Hummer was parked. And he's got this cobbled garage or something, and it dropped oil. And I was like, "Oh, crap." And he went, "Don't worry, he'll be here soon. You can meet him if you want." I was like, No, you're all right. So I bump started my Rover P6 out of this office car park in Harlow and took off as this Bentley kind of pulled up in front of the building. And I was like, I'm sure that was Frank Warren. But yeah, essentially, I've never, ever told anyone publicly or had it recorded that we damaged his Hummer. But yeah, we did.
Hopefully.
And now the secret is out. So
it's all right. He probably won't listen to this.
No, we'll be all right. So essentially, did all that kind of TV stuff, and then that dropped off as the journalism became more, and also the TV stuff as a presenter, it didn't sit very well on my shoulders. It felt odd. You had the odd occasion where you'd see somebody in a garage and you realise they'd seen you on TV earlier that day, and it was like, yeah, they'd treat you differently. And I was like, no, I'm not into this. People are closing down to you. They don't tell you their truth. So I was kind of like, yeah, I'm over that. But through all the modified car stuff and drifting and hosting events and all that sort of stuff, I got to know a guy called Al Clark. And Al and I both remember pretty much the first time that we can remember meeting was in 2007 when I'd left England. I'd just come back from 3 or 4 months in America, and when I just went and bought the cameras and stuff, and I was doing some filming at Chobham for Drift All Stars, as it was called then, or Togay Heroes or something, and Al was doing the filming out the back of his MX-5, and we just hit it off really, and there was a bit of a friendship, and we sort of knew each other and through events and drifting and everything. And Al is an incredibly talented filmmaker who his career started. He had this company called Track Day Films, and he wanted to film track days by renting out GoPros before GoPros existed and all that sort of stuff. And he basically got picked up, and he used to spend all his time going to the Nürburgring. Every single penny. He'd leave his job in South Wales, he'd drive to the Nürburgring, he'd do tourist farting all weekend, then he'd drive back to South Wales, go straight back to work. It was that core dedication to just not questioning anything, but just going and doing it. And he got picked up after 2007, 2008, 2009, made a film at the Nürburgring through a photographer, a friend of ours, Jochen von Kauenberg, a guy called Frozen Speed, who does a lot of photography at the Nürburgring, and he recommended Al for a job, and that job was then with an agency called FP Creative in London. And in 2012, I get a phone call off Al, and Al's like, "You've done TV stuff, you've done filming, we need to find," and he was doing little sort of short videos, little promotional videos for Jaguar and Land Rover and stuff like that. He said, we need to find someone who can produce something for us. Do you want to come in and talk about it? I was like, yeah, sounds good. So went down to London, had a meeting, and it was making a film about the anniversary of Stirling Moss and Norman Jewis, the legendary Jaguar test driver, going to the Mille Miglia in 1952 and proving to the world that disc brakes on a car could work.
Yeah, it does.
So that was the story, that was the premise. So there was a budget to make this film. The Mille Miglia was about 2 months away, and we had full access to go to the Mille Miglia with Jaguar, have Norman Jewis and Stirling Moss there, film on the podium before the race started, all that kind of stuff, and then follow them, film it, and then go on to film various other people around the story and create this film. And that's what pretty much we spent most of the summer of 2012 doing. So that's when my television producing and all that kind of stuff came back to the fore. It's probably 10 years after I'd used it last. And in the meantime, I'd done 10 of the Best and various different other DVD productions, and I'd hosted loads of shows, like live action shows and stuff, through people knowing that I'd done TV stuff. So they went, well, this guy can present, he can host this. So I sort of kept my hand in a little bit. But yeah, that then turned into working for FP Creative as a freelancer with Al, and essentially going off and making films for Jaguar, Land Rover, all over Europe. And yeah, doing that really. And that's where the production side of things really kicked off, and my analytical brain and my travel experience and all those other things that I'd learned, and also being a photographer, I kind of knew what the photographers wanted and what they wanted from a tracking car and what they need from a scene, and just the fact that if we were in a hotel, it had to have good Wi-Fi for uploading stuff. It had to have, it had to be a modern hotel, so it had loads of plugs in the rooms because you've always got loads of stuff to charge and all these little things. So that's how really I became known as a producer, and that is predominantly what I do in the realm of film production. And also there's absolutely, I've picked up a camera a few times and filmed with Al when it's been needed, but essentially when I'm stood next to Al, there is absolutely no reason for me to pick up a camera because the guy is gifted. So, and it's a real pleasure to work alongside somebody like that. And if I had more of an ego, I would probably want to be him and all that stuff, but why would I? He's awesome. And, there's things I can do that he can't do. So,
yeah, that's basically my relationship with Jason LaRosa, because I used to film alongside him, and then when we came to edit, it was like, oh, I just might as well not have been there. It's just like my input was not the quality of film; it was the organising of the day and all of that kind of stuff. So
I always say I get Al there and make sure he's fed and watered and he's got somewhere to sleep, and then he does that creative side, and he's incredibly generous with his energy as well, because we'll stand there by the side of a track or in a studio, and I'm always very aware of what I put in, but he will listen to my ideas and occasionally act on them. But then equally, there's other times where I will say something, then I'll see the edit and go, oh, that's why you were doing what you're doing, because he's kind of live editing in his head as he's creating it. So we formed a great little team for a while, and it's been brilliant, and that's where we just ended up in the most ridiculous of situations, really, doing some incredible things.
Yeah, you did the Bentley Bentayga in Peru, was it? Am I right in thinking that? Something like that?
So that was interesting, right? So that was 2016, I think it was. And this again is, so Al has always been kind of a one-man band, but to get to the next stage in his career, he needed to have more of a team around him. So me and him working as producer, putting stuff together, meant that when an agency came to him and said, look, we want you to make a film, he could say, okay, cool, hand it over to us and we can make it. And what happened off the back of that was Bentley came to him and said, oh, we've got this thing called the Extraordinary World where people can pay to drive a Bentley Bentayga from Chile into Bolivia, around the Atacama Desert and the mountains, Bolivian salt flats and all that stuff, down through the dunes of Iquique and back again. And we're doing 5 or 6 rotations. And we want to film it, but we also want to, and we want you to film it to Al, and we also want to take some stills, some photos. And Al was like, well, Bryn is a stills photographer, and he's done this a couple of times. And we've done numerous jobs now where he'll shoot the video, I shoot the stills. And they're little low key jobs, like a little film at the Nürburgring or something like that, where there's not a huge amount of production. Because on the bigger stuff that needs a lot of production, I just simply can't pick up a camera because you're wrestling a crew of like 25 people and all the other stupid stuff that happens. But yeah, that Chile job was amazing. He basically said, look, put me forward as a photographer. They were kind of like, this guy, cool. They looked at my portfolio, which was horribly out of date, and somehow had the faith. And the next thing we know, we're on a first-class flight to South America, and we had our own Bentley Bentayga with the most incredible PR lady from Bentley, whose name I won't mention, but she is hilariously amazing for all the best reasons. And yeah, we rode around in the desert and the mountains for 5 days, just in this mind-blowing situation of, it just really, it was an incredible trip.
That's fantastic. I will link underneath this video that's on YouTube, unless you're listening on Spotify or some other podcasting type thing. Go and search for it on YouTube. There is also the behind the scenes of the Bugatti Chiron top speed shoot that Bryn was involved in, as filmed by Mr. Al Clark as well. I will put a link in there so you can see the sort of stuff they've been doing. And
you can see Al leave out loads and loads of details. He just skims through so much good stuff on that film, because he sort of put that together whilst the whole COVID-19 thing's been going on. And we've known there's been an edit lying around for the last couple of years with that with summer 2017, but that job was again incredible, and I'm so thankful for it. It was and that again, Al was on the Chiron launch in Portugal filming journalists, something that he'd not done in a few years. But when Bugatti said, do you want to come and do it? He went, well, yes, Bugatti Chiron, I should probably go and do that. So, and he said to them, I really want to film a Chiron at top speed, and I can film it from another Chiron. And that kind of idea resonated with them. At the same time, we were working on another project with Bugatti, which never came to light, but we had to go to Germany and do some filming, and Al kind of took me along. I think on the first job, I went along as his assistant. So they'd sort of just got enough money to get him to drive over to Germany and do a bit of filming. And he was like, oh, can I bring an assistant? They were like, yeah, of course. And we had a discussion. And I said, well, look, if I go, I'm your producer. We can see where we can go with this, see if there's anything else in it. And sure enough, we had a great weekend. Things went horribly wrong with what we were filming, and it never came to light. Although I would say I was possibly the first person in the world to colour in the front horseshoe on a Bugatti Chiron with a Sharpie marker, we got to meet the communications team from Bugatti, or I got to meet them that weekend, and just have a really great chat. And I think it then gave them the confidence in Al to know that there was a team around him that were actually, because manufacturers, they have these big agencies and they have all these big production companies. So a bloke from Birmingham in a Mercedes estate is just as capable as all those other people, but they can't quite make that bridge to it. So as the producer, I was the bridge. And off the back of that, they then said, look, if you wanted to do this top speed thing, how would you do it? So we basically hit them with the knowledge, and they had the faith in us, and they made it happen. And it was, it was incredible riding around with Juan Pablo Montoya for an hour in a Chiron. And when he, at the Frankfurt Motor Show a couple of months later when it was released, turned around and said, and that was the time that I went the fastest in a car I've ever done. That is my land speed record. And I always thought I will always be known as, I'll always be the unknown person in the passenger seat, because I was literally CGI'd out of the whole film.
One of my emergency questions is, what's the fastest you've been in a car? So I'm going to assume if that's the fastest Juan Pablo Montoya has been, that's pretty much got to be the fastest you've been as well, right?
261 miles an hour.
That's quite quick.
And that was repeatedly as well. We did it a couple of times, a few times, in fact, over the course of the hour, because basically Juan Pablo was just ignoring the instructions. And this all came about. It wasn't intentional that I was going to sit in the car with Juan Pablo, but we gave him a radio. Al got in the helicopter. We were there for a whole weekend filming this film that we're talking about, the 0 to 400 to 0. And it very quickly became apparent, like literally within half an app, that Juan Pablo could not hear Al in the helicopter, and it was just going to be dangerous. So we very quickly, and I can remember him pulling back into the pits, and we were kind of like, what are we going to do, what are we going to do? And I just went, I'm going to get in the passenger seat with a radio, it'll be fine. And nobody questioned it. So I just got in the passenger seat, put the blue jacket over my legs, because they had Bugatti blue seats, and I blagged a Bugatti jacket, put it over my jeans so that it was easier to touch out or whatever. And off we went. And me and Juan Pablo, he was a legend. He was hilarious for very many reasons. But there was one particular moment where we came off the banking at the start of the Erelesen Strait, which is 5 miles long. It's about 9 kilometres long. So, because they are so correct with what they've done, they've made it completely level, so it doesn't follow the curvature of the earth. So at either end of the straight, you're stood at tree level, so there's trees all around it, and the trees start either side of the track, and in the middle of it there's a cutaway like you get on a motorway that's about 20-30 feet deep, and we came off this banked corner at the start of the straight. And Al's kind of like, okay, can you tell Juan Pablo to stop in the middle of the track, accelerate up to 120 miles an hour, then come to a stop, and we're going to hover and go around him and all this stuff. And I was like, yeah, cool. And Juan Pablo's listening to this, and he just looks at me and goes, tell him I can't hear him. Tell him I'm just going to gas it. And with that, he just planted the Chiron, and we outran the helicopter in seconds. And we hit, 261, and we slowed down, and we did it again. And he just did that a couple of times during the hour. And we came in, and the lady, head of communications for Bugatti, who's now moved on, but an incredibly gracious woman and incredibly clever. And I'm not just saying this because she used us or anything like that. For many, many reasons, she was just very good at her job. Just took me to one side and she said, Bryn, she said, that was very naughty of you. And I was like, I don't understand. What do you mean? Sorry, what have I done? And she said, bearing in mind the whole car is telemetry linked to a technical support unit in the pits with all these Bugatti engineers, and they're like, every time he did that, they're basically saying he needs to come in now, we need to check the car, we need to check the car, we need to check the car. And it wasn't because the car couldn't do it, it's just literally because everything is riding on everything on that car being right, and the tyres not being worn out and all this stuff. And Juan Pablo is driving it like a brand new Golf GTI at 130 mile an hour, but we're doing twice that speed. And genuinely, the car was fine, and there was, I can hand on heart to the day I die, we hid nothing on that film. The car didn't break, it didn't cause us an ounce of problems. It genuinely went out, and repeatedly, bearing in mind they'd been practicing the week before as well, for about 4 or 5 days, that Chiron just went out and did 250, 260 mile an hour to a halt whenever they wanted it to. It was incredible.
I should probably get myself on. Not that I can do 260 miles. Actually, I probably could at the moment. The roads are very empty. But
yeah, it's that's the fastest I've ever been. And before that, it was 211 in an R33 Skyline when I worked on Revs in about 2000.
That's still
then
pushing it.
I think. Yeah, that was with no harnesses at Bruntingthorpe. Literally, the guy just went out and did it, and I was sat in the passenger seat going, "Holy hell!" And that was with a V box or something like a Race Logic box or something on it. So it was a genuine verified GPS speed.
Good Lord!
And then did 186 on the Silver State Classic in Nevada in a Mustang, again as a passenger. Been very lucky but
little bit of
speed. Speed is not. I'm not a speed merchant. There was a long time I used to drive fast, and I used to really enjoy it. and I used to feel comfortable in a car on the edge. But I think as you go through life, and I met Al and found his overriding passion for his filming skills, and since then I've met drivers as well. And Al he's an incredibly talented driver. There's very few people I go around the Nürburgring with, but I've been around numerous times with him, and we've hit water at 90 mile an hour on the motorway, and he's just sort of it's incredible. So when you meet people like that, you go, am I that kind of person? No, I'm not. So who am I? And what it does is it allows you to turn down the volume on that part of your life or that part of your interest and go, right, let me go and find out where I'm really good and what I can excel at.
That's a good attitude to have towards that kind of stuff, for sure. I never understood people that come out of motorsports venues and then just drive on the road like they were on the track. I'm like, well, you could have gone and done that on the track. So, like, why are you doing this now? Because it always struck me that if you have that much talent and that much desire to go fast, you can go and do that at the Nürburgring, or you can do your track days, or come and do the hill at Gathering or whatever. So yeah,
it's ego and frustration, though, isn't it?
I think that's what it is. That's what I'm going to come into. It's possibly like underneath the knowledge that actually, if they were out on the track at Brands Hatch, they probably wouldn't be quite as quick as somebody else in the same car. So it's easier to drive quick on the road. Anyway, that's a whole rant.
The psychology of speed is fascinating. Have you ever heard of a book called High Performance?
I have not.
You should dig it out. I can't remember the guy was I think he was a Harvard psychology professor or something, but yeah, it's called High Performance, and it basically breaks it down as to why, because he was really into drag racing and how illogical drag racing is. And this was, it's a big old book, but it was summed up for me by an ex-girlfriend when she lived just north of London, so I used to go and crash with her when I was working at Santa Pod, and I was leaving her house at 6 o'clock in the morning. And she was a very intelligent woman. She worked in the city. I have literally no idea what she was doing with me, but she said to me, drag racing, what's drag racing then? I said, well, look, you line up, it's 1/4 of a mile, and it's the first one to the end, basically. And she went, okay, so how does it compare to Formula One? And I said, well, it's a lot shorter, it's a lot more intense, all this stuff. And she went, right, so the fastest one wins the first one there? I was like, yeah. She went, well, how fast are the fastest ones doing it? And I went, 4 seconds, something like that. She went, right, so the more money you spend, the less time you spend doing the thing that you love. I was like, yes, correct. But I then had to try and reconcile that within me. I was like, so why do it? Because the hit is so much greater.
Yeah.
So I guess the guy who drives away from a race circuit, having watched a race, and maybe drives like a bit of an idiot down the dual carriageway, ultimately has not reached the extremes of his life. So he may live somewhere that's fairly familiar to him. He may have married the woman or the partner who, conveniently worked at the same workplaces as him. All those sorts of things. So it depends how far you take yourself away from where you started as to how much you can experience, I guess, how much you open yourself up to experience.
Yeah, I like that. An interesting set of psychology. I actually have 2 questions for you here that have come from Johnny Smith.
Yep.
What is the most Somerset car you've ever seen? Bearing in mind you're both from Taunton Way.
I literally, as soon as you said that, it just flashed up in my head, right? So it's Run to the Sun. It's about 2001, 2002, something like that. And this car was a completely bog standard 1.6 Mark 1 Ford Sierra, normal 5-door hatchback.
Most Somerset car in the world.
Yeah, and these guys are parked up. They've got one of the first caravans for anybody that remembers Run to the Sun on the Trevelga campsite. As you drove into the campsite, you drove up that first road. There was a row of caravans on the left-hand side, and it was one of these first caravans. But they'd kind of wedged this Sierra down next to the caravan, and it was maybe, what would it have been at the time? Probably about 16, 17 years old. But it literally just had spray painted really, really badly. It hadn't even gone over the letters. It just had charred core sprayed down the side of it. And for anybody who's not familiar with Somerset, you've got Taunton is the county town, the market town, and then and Taunton's right on a motorway. So you've got Bristol, you've got Exeter, you've got all these places you can go to. You've got the north coast of Somerset, which has got Minehead and all these holiday places. And then you've got South Somerset, and there's very much a division between the two. And Chard, Axminster, all round there. If you were from Chard, you didn't like Taunton. And if you were from Taunton, supposedly, you didn't like Chard. So we're walking past, a little bit drunk, past this Sierra, and I laughed out loud. I'm like, that is genius. And these blokes are all sat outside like, oh, yeah, Chardcore, yeah, Chardcore. And I was like, yeah, Chardcore. I was like, they were like, where are you from? And I went, Taunton. And their faces just died. They were kind of like, right, almost like, go fuck yourself. And and that summed it up for me. So right off the top of my head, whether it's the most Somerset car I've seen or not, that's the first one that sprung to my head.
That's superb. And do you remember your VW 412 that you got from Johnny?
Oh, yeah, I do. Yeah, that was, see, that's another very telling indicator of the fact that my eyes are bigger than my achievements, I guess. Because I used to just systematically buy cars. I would never wait until I had thousands of pounds. I'd have tens or hundreds of pounds, and I would just go out and buy something. And it was a 412. I think I've even still got the logbook somewhere. It was at a place called. Can we swear on this?
You can swear a little bit.
Bullshit. There you go. So Bullshit John, his name was called, and I never saw that element of him. I actually think he was actually a very straight up and down guy. He lived over outside Milverton, and he had like an old VW yard. Basically, it was just packed with loads of old VWs. And his story was apparently he was really big into the VW scene in the 80s in London and knew all the key players. His wife was a producer on That's Life, and they basically moved to the countryside before it came trendy. And he brought a load of VW stuff with him, and apparently he had warehouses full of really cool, proper early stuff and valuable stuff and Porsche stuff. So you can imagine living in a little colloquial town, little Milverton in Somerset. Lots of people with, Mr. Zog sex wax stickers and Run to the Sun fans and stuff like that would probably sort of think, oh, yeah, whatever, mate, don't believe you. But I genuinely think it was a real article. So in his yard, he had this 411, 412 that had been converted into a van and had a Ford V6 put in the back of it. And the Ford V6 had been taken out. And yeah, I think Johnny owned it and I bought it from him.
Yep.
I'd forgotten I bought it from Johnny, actually. And if I have got that logbook somewhere, his name must be on the logbook before mine.
Star power.
That's
there.
Random. Well, I've got the filing cabinet next to me with all my old logbooks in it, so I'll have to have a dig through. But so I remember it well. It was green bottom half, white top half with like a pale green stripe through the middle. It had been built by the Herbie Hospital in Leeds, I think it was. And yeah, I can't even remember who I sold it to. I doubt whether it even saw the day of light after that. Great shame. The ones you kill unintentionally.
Yeah, accidentally destroyed.
Yeah.
So we're pretty close to the end now. We've gone on probably massively over time. I try to keep these to an hour. I think we're probably about an hour and 20 minutes in at this point, but that's all good. This is a podcast. You can do that.
It's all anarchy.
Yeah. I'm going to see what you're working on now, if you want to just tell us what you're up to. And then I don't know if you've got anything to promote or whatever you're doing, but...
not actually working. What am I working on now? So we're right in the middle of this is the start of April. We're right in the middle of the COVID-19 thing. I say right in the middle. We're potentially at the start of it. So we're all on lockdown. All our work fell over very quickly. So within a matter of days in mid-March, everything got cancelled for this month, next month. And we're not too sure when it's going to come back. And a lot of those projects are manufacturer projects that we can't really talk about because they're just... they're for stuff that's coming up in the future. So a lot of stuff we do is embargoed. So people often sort of come to me and say, oh, what are you doing? I haven't seen anything on social media or whatever. It's like, well, I can't really, we're not allowed to. So, and I always think if you put stuff on in retrospect and go, oh, I did this, which I do sometimes, it's a bit kind of like, look, I'm doing something really important when it's months ago. So right now I am planning to do a podcast. I'm talking to you from my podcasting microphone. It's something that I really want to do because I don't write anymore. The journalism fell over about maybe 3-4 years ago. I stopped working for Speed Hunters, and that was my last outlet as a writer. And I really miss chats like this, right? Just talking car stuff. And yes, this one's about me, but I want to be sat where you are, and I want to have those conversations that I used to have across the kitchen tables and the garage bar tops and all those sorts of places that I had for so many years of my life. Because those stories are out there, and I don't feel like they're really being told in the format that I want to tell them. So I've got this idea for a podcast called The Piston Bully, which has kind of been a name that I've had in my head for about 15 years. And yeah, that's gonna take form. I want to do it face to face, so I'm going to wait until this is all over and see where that goes. And got a couple of other things bubbling away, some which are car planned, car orientated, and some which are not, some which are completely removed from cars, as I sort of transition through another part of my life, basically.
Oh, always in transition, which is a nice thing.
Yeah.
To see. Cool.
Evolving. You have to organically evolve, and that's what I've learned, is that if you sit still for too long, and I see it now that I've moved away from certain things in my life, like the car shows, all that sort of stuff, that I can't quite feel comfortable going back to them. I need to, my seeking system is the thing that keeps me moving. And it's really, really hard to reconcile that, because you have to have lots of new stuff going on all the time. But you can't do that when you've chosen where to live, you've chosen the person to spend your life with, you have a family. And so it's very interesting. Hopefully going to work on some stuff with Johnny as well at some point. We've talked about it for years and have never got on with it. And maybe there's a couple of things floating around in the next year or so, which will be our opportunity. There's some TV stuff. That's the thing. For 20 years, the phone has rung. People have sent an email. Something's happened. So I am open to the possibilities of a life.
Something will always occur. It's an inevitability of life.
A.C. Weisbacher, in his book The Cosmic Bandidos, said when the main character had just tossed a grenade into a bar in Mexico, which I wouldn't recommend, but he said it'll be interesting to see what happens next. And that's always the way. I'm always interested to see what's going to happen next.
That's you and me both. Well, what's going to happen next is this podcast going to finish. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, man. Seriously, and on behalf of everyone listening, thank you for retro rides, because we haven't talked about retro rides, and I know obviously you've done the stuff with Simon, but genuinely, that is, hand on heart, the only forum I have ever used on a regular basis. I mean, more than I've maybe put 5 posts on another forum, and I've got 3,500 on retro rides, and I joined when it was about a year old.